Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back once again to another episode of Vanilla Minecraft. Obviously, we're up here on the floating platform again today, after our little world tour detour last episode, and that's because we need to finish up this sugarcane farm. So, the actual technical side of this building, the sugarcane farms that we put down in the basement, as well as the shulker box retrieval system, those are mostly in place. There's a few little things to do, and I may want to tweak some stuff, but for the most part, those are good to go. The aesthetic side of the build, though, that being the entire building on top, well, that still needs a bit of work. Most notably the interior, which we haven't even really started on yet. So that's going to be the main thing that we're focusing on today. But before we dive to the inside, I do want to modify one thing with the building itself, and that is the size. So the general style of the building I think looks okay, but it ended up looking really kind of compact and squished down. It feels very small, and I think part of that's because it's next to our crop farm building, but also I think it's because the building almost feels square, and it feels just kind of compact because of that. And I think that one way that we can try and get away from this really small feeling that this building has is by making it a little bit wider. Not huge, I still don't want it to be like a full-blown, realistically scaled factory, but I think if we take this front corner right here and move it over, say, 10 blocks or so, maybe to like right about here, and then of course move all of this stuff over the same amount, I think that's going to make it feel a lot better. So, I'm going to go ahead and try that out, and hopefully it looks at least a decent amount better from that, and then we can dive to the inside and start working on all of that stuff. So that was a bit more of a pain in the butt than I thought it was going to be. For some reason, every time I thought I was done, I found 5 more things I had to try and do. But I do think that turned out okay. I do think it was well worth doing, more importantly, because I don't think it feels quite so squished down anymore. And I mean, the building is still relatively small for a factory and for what it's supposed to be. But I think that has helped a good bit, even just that little extra bump that we gave it. So I'm glad we did that, even if it was kind of a hassle. I may still come through and add a little bit more to it yet, you know, maybe tweak the details a little bit. I also was going to try and do something with the smoke, kind of make it merge together and form one big cloud, kind of like actual smokestacks do when you see them. But I decided I should probably test that out in creative first, because I think it could turn out looking really awful. So I'll have to play around with that at some point. For right now, though, let's hop into the building. And obviously the interior is still completely empty, though of course we do have a little bit more room to work with now, so that should be nice. We'll kind of see how this turns out. Not entirely confident about the interior, but we'll talk about that in a second. Let's head on down to the basement first. So obviously I also expanded the basement because, well, why not? And we do actually have a lot of empty space here now. We can definitely fit in an extra sugarcane farm, in fact, and I will probably do that. In fact, I think we could actually probably even squeeze in 2, though that might be getting a little bit too crunched in. We'll see how it goes. But more importantly, I also updated this system right here. So as you may recall, we had a bulk storage system as well as a shulker box retrieval system so that we can get shulker boxes full of sugarcane whenever we need them. And this was based on the same design that I used over in our crop farm building. But that design had a couple shortcomings, particularly in this environment where you don't have easy access to the chests. So when I had the opportunity, because obviously, you know, I had to move this over so it was under the storage area, when I had the opportunity, I went ahead and modified this design and improved it for what this particular farm actually needs. And that was 2 major things. So one issue that the previous design had was that each column was mostly just bulk storage. Like, the chests themselves wouldn't actually filter down into the shulker boxes. They were just there to retain all of the excess. And in general use, that wouldn't really have been an issue, but it was still kind of annoying. I didn't like that a bit of inefficiency. So thankfully that was an easy thing to solve. All we had to do was stagger the chests and make them filter into one another. The other thing we had to solve was how the chests got filled up. Because in the previous system, quite simply, all that would happen is each column would get filled up one at a time, and it would go down towards the right side. The issue with that is that the shulker boxes then wouldn't get filled at full efficiency until the entire farm was almost full. Now, I didn't consider that a huge issue because, well, I probably was just going to fill the farm up before I ever really used much of it. I was just going to AFK here and get a ton of sugarcane ahead of time. But I decided, since I was moving it, I may as well fix that as well, and thus I put in this little rail system. So basically what was just happening is the minecart down here got filled up from our sugarcane farm. Not necessarily filled up, it just got the output from it every time it harvests. And it gets sent up here and it bounces back and forth, evenly distributing amongst all of the chests. So that actually works out really well, but it does have one shortcoming. And it's a shortcoming I didn't really think about until I was actually in here building this, and that's that there wasn't a good way to handle overflow. So basically the issue with this design is that once all of the chests get filled up and the hoppers behind them do, well, there wouldn't be anywhere for the chest to empty out, the chest minecarts I mean, and it would just keep bouncing back and forth up there infinitely until we took sugarcane out. So the system would eventually correct itself. As soon as we came over here and took some sugarcane out of the system, it would filter down, it would fill into the new shulker boxes we put in, and everything would go back to normal. But that would mean that our sugarcane farms were running and a lot of stuff was being wasted. So I did manage to squeeze an overflow in here. It was kind of spur of the moment. Like I said, I didn't really plan for it while I was designing the rest of this system, which, by the way, is substantially cleaner and more compact now as well. I don't know if you remember the redstone in the previous design, but it was just awful. So, yeah, that's a big help as well. But this little blob up here was kind of spur of the moment. It's a little bit messy, but basically what it does is it traps the minecart on the end once this last chest over here is filled up. So basically, once the entire system is more or less full, it will catch the minecarts at the very end. I think I can actually go up here. It'll catch the minecarts on this rail right here, empty it out into these hoppers, and then once the minecart is emptied out, it'll send it back on its way. And technically, that's not actually leading to anything at the moment. Once 1.14 hits, which should be right around the corner, so much as I can tell, once 1.14 hits, all we need to do is pop a composter right there, and that will automatically turn all of our excess sugarcane into bone meal, and then store it in this chest. Of course, I could put more chests and whatnot down here. I don't actually know that I'm going to keep that, because frankly, I don't actually need bone meal. I have several double chests 100% full of bone blocks at this point, but I figured that would be kind of an easy way to handle it. So I have to remember to come back down here once 1.14 hits, but that's how we're going to handle that. So that's what's going on in the basement. I will likely be adding another sugarcane farm, and of course we do still need to hook up the actual inputs and outputs to this system, which is quite simple. All we need to do is put empty shulker boxes into this hopper chain up here, and the output is from these hoppers down here. All we need to do is put them into an item elevator and send them up above. But the reason I haven't done that quite yet is that, well, we need to sort out the interior first. We need to know what we're going to do with particularly this little area over here and where we want things to go so we know where we want the items to pop out. Now, to be honest, I'm not entirely sure how the interior of this build is going to turn out. I don't feel like Minecraft, at least vanilla Minecraft, with vanilla textures and no crazy extra modded blocks, I don't feel like it lends itself very well to the industrial build style, at least at this scale. If you're doing something like a huge shipyard, you can do some really cool stuff, but when it comes to more normal-sized builds, or, relatively small buildings like this one, yeah, so it's going to be a little interesting. It might turn out a little bit derpy, but, well, let's get to it. We'll see what it turns out like after we're done, and we'll go from there. So I think this build is pretty much done now. As always, there's of course going to be little things that I always want to go back and tweak, and once 1.14 hits, we may come back with a few of the new blocks and add them into the mix. But for the most part, at least for today, I think it's pretty much good. So let's actually dive in here and take a look at the derpy mess that I have constructed. And this area right here is probably the least interesting of them. I didn't really know what to do here, honestly, because it's this little separate area, kind of separate from the rest of the factory at least, and it also has these windows in it, so it felt a little bit strange just blocking that up with machinery or storage or anything along those lines. So the most logical thing, at least in my mind, was to turn it into an employee break area. And obviously it's not particularly detailed, it's really kind of Spartan and bland. You know, little lockers, little time card punch machine thing. Pretty basic stuff, but I think that kind of suits the build fairly well, actually, so I'm not going to complain about it too much. It was actually a similar story up above. So if we take this little staircase, which I think is fairly thematic, but if we come up here, again, we had the situation of having a little kind of outset area that wouldn't really fit much for the factory build itself. So I turned this into kind of like the boss's area or the administrative area. You know, you got a little typewriter. Keep in mind this is supposed to be in like the 40s, even if the build itself doesn't really feel that old, honestly. But little typewriter, filing cabinet, boss's desk where he, you know, sits in his chair and talks down to you. You get the idea. So, yeah, that's all this is, you know, that's all that's up here. Not a whole lot to say about it, but I think it turned out okay. I think it matches really well. Neglected plant. And then, of course, we have the little walkways and stuff. This one, of course, leading out to the fire exit. Hey, we can spy on our villagers from here. You're not doing your job, guy. I see unharvested crops. Get to work. So, anyway, that is what's up here. I was considering adding in more of these walkways, because obviously we only have that one over there, and then this one, which leads up to the door that goes to the roof. And we do have room for more, like I could make this branch out that way or go over there, and we could do that, but honestly, I think that would feel a little bit too chaotic. I think it would make the build feel a little too messy. For, you know, a build of this size, I think it would be a little too much. But we can go up here, we can go out onto the roof if we ever want to do that for some reason. Not sure why, but, you know, I figured I would put it in. That is the only time in history that door will ever be opened, but that's okay. We know it's there. So that's what's going on up here. Obviously, we also have these hanging lights, which honestly, I don't know what to say about them. They don't really feel like they fit in, but I wasn't sure what other options I had because I really wanted the effect of the hanging like singular lights, but I didn't want to use anything that felt warm. So I didn't want redstone lamps or glowstone because those feel like, you know, warm lights. I wanted something that felt very cold and industrial, and the sea lantern looks really good for that from below. I love the texture of that for this application, but we didn't really have anything good to put around it. Obviously, iron trap doors would be ideal, but we have no way to close them because we can't send power through the sea lantern. So, unfortunately, that's not really a thing. I really wish we had a way of manually closing iron trap doors, but nope, not an option. So I think this is about the best I can do, unless I switch to redstone lamps, which maybe that would look better. Maybe having redstone lamps with iron trapdoors would probably fit a little better. I'm not entirely sure. I think the only other option we would really have is doing some kind of custom map art for the sides, which, come to think of it, we do actually have the stone texture map art. That one might actually work. Wonder what that would look like. You know what? Let me actually go and grab that and try that out on one of these lights, and I'll be back in a second. So let's see what this looks like. Oh, not very good. I think the issue here is that it looks so much like the stone texture. I mean, that's what it's clearly meant to look like. But because it looks so close to the stone texture, it feels like we're just hanging a stone block from the ceiling, and it feels kind of weird. So, yeah, that's probably not going to work. Doesn't look quite as bad from below, but it still feels really strange. I think if we were going to go the map art route, we would have to make a new texture. Something that feels a little more metallic and probably has better shading. Though, I'm also not sure that that would actually be worth it. I wouldn't mind making the texture itself, but that is also a lot of entities to be loading too. Keep in mind that would be 4 item frames for every single light in the building. And those would be loaded whenever we're doing anything up on the floating platform. So, I don't know about that. It might be a little bit too much, especially considering we'll never really see them very much. Because, well, we're not really going to be entering this building too often. So, I don't know. You guys can let me know if you think it would be worth it or not. Obviously, the trapdoors do feel a little weird. So, I don't know. I suppose I could also just do it with redstone lamps and completely encase it in iron trapdoors. But I really like the sea lantern look. So, I don't know. You guys can let me know what you think. Anyway, moving on to the rest of the building. So, down here we have the conveyor belt. We'll actually be talking about that last. Over here we have a couple tanks. Not much to say about these. I think we actually looked at those back a couple episodes ago when I was building stuff to kind of show the things we could put in here. And obviously we have like this little container of, I guess, sugarcane is what this is meant to be. I don't know what I'm doing. So that's that. Over here we have the various shelves just full of stuff, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense, to be honest. I don't know why this factory would have containers of all varying kinds like this, but I think it looks kind of cool, so that's what's important. And then we also have a lot of these little boxes strewn around. You'll find them all over the place, actually. These are how I'm hiding a lot of the lighting in here, because lighting this place was a bit of a nightmare. Obviously, the hanging lights aren't really doing much of anything, and there's just so much big open space where we didn't really have the means to hide it in many ways, which is why there's a lot of carpet kind of laying around, so we can hide different light sources wherever we need to. But yeah, these are actually how I've hidden lights in a bunch of different areas, just kind of glowstone covered with these blank maps. I think it works fairly well for this particular build, thankfully. And then over here, again, we're hiding lighting in one of these, but this one is on a little hand truck or dolly type thing. I kind of like this little design for this. It feels kind of cute, though the wheels are obviously a bit disproportionate. I kind of considered not having them. I think it probably looks a little more realistic without wheels at all, honestly, versus having these huge ones. But, I don't know, I think that's kind of the charm of building detailed stuff in Minecraft. It's all a little bit derpy, right? So if we head over here, here's the service entrance. This is obviously how we get down to the redstone stuff. And this has gotten substantially messier since the last time that you saw it. There's a lot of stuff down here to power our conveyor belt system, which we'll be looking at in a moment. But before that, there is this one last section, and that is the shipping and receiving area. Obviously, this is just a bunch of containers, our little baby forklift that we came up with, and, I started loading up the truck. I did try, and I know I mentioned this before, I did try making a cardboard box map art, because I do think that could have looked really cool in here, is having cardboard boxes. And that would apply for the entire build, actually. But it didn't really turn out very well. I'll try and remember to put a screenshot up right now. It's just that the maps don't have as much color kind of definition as we need to make subtle texture like cardboard boxes have. So it ended up being mostly a flat texture, and I don't know. It just didn't really feel like it was worth it to me. So, I don't know. If you guys like it, I can definitely do it, but it feels a little bit too flat and boring to me, which is unfortunate because it would have looked good, but what you gonna do? Anyway, that is, for the most part, the entire build. There is one other detail over here, though, and that is, of course, the way that we interact with the farm itself, and that is via this little hand truck here. So, basically, if we click through the corners of these item frames on this one, we're going to access a chest, and inside of that chest, we can put a shulker box. Now, this one is already full with sugarcane because I was testing things, but normally we would put an empty shulker box in there. That would go down below and pop into the system and would start getting filled up with sugarcane. Now, the shulker box that it's replacing, which should already be full of sugarcane, then gets dispensed right here. So this pops up, and there we go. Full box of sugarcane. And then, of course, we can go over to our villager, do all of our trading, and that's all we need to do. Pretty sweet. Our villager, by the way, the future is not looking very bright for this build. I think we're going to end up having to completely replace it with the new villager mechanics coming in 1.14 because they are very, very different. Really cool. There's a lot of cool stuff to them, but yeah, it's going to get a lot more involved than what this building has space for, I think. So that's going to be interesting. Kind of looking forward to it, but it's also a little sad. Anyway, moving on to the last thing in this build, and that is, of course, the conveyor belt system. So we talked about the conveyor belt a little bit 2 episodes ago, and I showed the idea of kind of sending items across the carpet with ice underneath, and obviously that's what we ended up doing, at least for this first half. I did actually experiment with a lot of other ideas, though, because I did really want the idea of the armor stands poking through. I think that would look really good to have like lime-dyed armor stands kind of poking through. Yeah, armor stands with lime-dyed leather caps, I should say. It would look like little packages of sugarcane. But unfortunately, it's just not possible. Some of you suggested moving the armor stands around with water, which was a really good idea. But unfortunately, if the armor stands are poking through the carpet at all, even the teeniest, tiniest little bit, they collide with it. So even if you get it up through one carpet, it's just going to collide with the next one. And the only way to really solve that problem and make it keep going is to shift the carpet back and forth like a shifting floor, which it works, but it's really glitchy looking and it doesn't make a good looking effect. So unfortunately, that wasn't really an option. I did come up with a system that I think is kind of cool, though, at least until we get the ability to move armor stands and minecarts again. Once we do that, I may come back here and modify this. But let me show you guys how this thing works. So when we come over and flip this switch on this machine, it's going to turn on a loop of repeaters down below. And every time those repeaters go through one full cycle, it sends out a signal to a couple different places. So the first signal is sent over to the system that shoots out the sugarcane. And basically, whenever this system receives a pulse, it will dispense out 2 sugarcane and then activate the piston to launch it across the conveyor belt. Now in the little middle section, this sugarcane actually gets picked back up and then sent back to the system, forming a closed loop so it can run forever. The second signal is sent over to the other half of the conveyor belt, which is actually a minecart system running on chest minecarts. Basically, we send them across and send those underneath a row of carpet, and only the top of the chest minecart pokes through, so it looks like a little package of some kind. The middle section of the conveyor belt also has a little bit of redstone hidden in it. Nothing too complicated, and obviously it's not actually really doing anything, but I thought it would be kind of cool to make it so that every time the minecart passes by and is about to go up to the conveyor belt, it actually activates a piston inside of the central unit, so it kind of looks like it's processing the sugarcane somehow. So the end result of all of that, I think, turned out pretty cool. We've got sugarcane getting launched down one side and then getting kind of packaged and sent out the other side. I think the chest minecart half in particular actually looks really good as a conveyor belt. We could even make it more frequent if we wanted the little boxes to look like they were coming out quicker. So that's actually a really good technique for this, I feel. And we could also use a couple other options as well. The furnace minecart would look gray, the TNT minecart would look probably weird, and I believe the hopper minecart should work for this as well, though that one might not. I'm not entirely positive. Either way, this is a really cool trick for it. That thing broke already. Yeah, if we ever get the ability to put armor stands into minecarts again, I'm pretty sure I'm going to replace this first one, just because it seems to break pretty often. Basically, what seems to be happening, and it looks like it might happen right here. Yep. What seems to happen is the dropper inside. It's going to do it again, isn't it? Wow, I'm having awful luck. Basically, what seems to happen is that the dropper will sometimes dispense an item, and it gets stuck in this little gap right here, which we need to have in order to make this system work. And then when it goes to push the sugarcane, it just kind of, makes it jump or shoot out the sides or something like that. So that's kind of unfortunate and kind of a bummer. Hopefully eventually they fix that minecart armor stand bug and we can replace that. For right now though, I do still think it's kind of cool. So that's that system, and well, I think I'm going to call it a day. I feel like I've been rambling for quite an extensive amount of time now after finishing the building in here. So we're going to call it here. Hopefully you guys enjoyed, and as always, be sure to let me know if you have any ideas for things we can do in here. So ideas for what we should do for the lighting is one, because I do know that still feels kind of strange. And also, hello? Also, if you have other ideas for things like, say, the conveyor belts, which keeps breaking, or anything like that, be sure to let me know. Though, I have tried, I'm pretty sure, pretty much every option for the conveyor belt system. I even tried using zombies and creepers to get their heads to poke through and look like sugarcane. Yeah, it didn't quite work. So, anyway, if you have any ideas for the builds, as always, be sure to let me know. But for today, I'm going to call it here. So, thank you all for watching. I hope you had a good time. I hope you have an amazing day. And, well, I'll see you guys next time.